My name is Anastasia, and from childhood, I was taught one simple truth. No one owes anyone anything in this life. If you want to achieve something, rely only on yourself. My parents repeated this so often that over time, I began to accept it as a law of nature. I was a good student, started working part-time early, entered university without any help, and already in my final year, I began looking for a job. While my classmates celebrated their graduation, I ran around interviews with a resume in hand and a dread in my chest. I was afraid of failing, afraid of appearing weak. I got my first job at a small analytics agency. It wasn't prestigious, but the salary was steady. I rented a tiny studio apartment, cramped, with a kitchen the size of a pantry, but it was my own. It was my first real sense of freedom. I paid for everything myself, lived within my means, and was proud of it. My younger sister, Victoria, lived a completely different life. She stayed home with her parents and seemed to give no thought to the future. Her parents treated her with endless affection, as if she were something fragile, requiring constant protection. Vika doesn't have to work, her mother said. She has another purpose. No one really explained what that purpose was. Vika participated in photo shoots, dreamed of a beautiful life, and was sure that one day everything would work out. Her parents supported this illusion. I didn't, but I kept silent. I didn't want to appear envious or angry. I convinced myself that we were simply different. I was the one who survived. She was the one who was cared for. Sometimes, late at night, sitting on my creaky couch with instant noodles, I caught myself thinking unpleasantly, why was more always expected of me? Why was my independence taken for granted, and her inactions so endearing? But I pushed those thoughts away. This was my life, my path. I couldn't even imagine that very soon my strength would become not a virtue, but an excuse to exploit me completely. Everything changed one ordinary weekday. My mother called me. Her voice was trembling, alien. "Nastia," she said. "Dad's in trouble. He's had a stroke." I remember that moment down to the smallest detail. The noise of the office, the cold in my chest, the emptiness in my head. I dropped everything and went to see them. In the hospital, my father looked small and helpless. The man who had always seemed like a pillar of strength to me lay motionless, struggling to find words. "Daughter, you're here," he whispered. I squeezed his hand and realized there was no turning back. Recovery required money, time, and effort. My mother worked herself to the bone. The bills were mounting, and help was needed constantly. I started transferring money, coming home on weekends, picking up extra shifts. After a couple of weeks, my mother cautiously suggested, "Maybe you could move in with us for a while? It would be easier for everyone." I was hesitant, very hesitant. I knew it would ruin my routine, my balance. But I looked at my father, at my tired mother, and agreed. I thought I was making the right choice. I didn't yet know that this house would cease to be my home. The first weeks after I moved in, I lived on autopilot. Work, the road, home, caring for my father. Everything merged into an endless chain of actions that left no room for thought. I'd wake up before dawn, drive across the city, work a full day, and then return home to medications, treatments, cooking, and cleaning. The room I returned to had hardly changed since my teenage years. The same closets, the same walls, only now they lacked comfort. Everything seemed temporary, as if I were stuck between the past and the future, belonging to neither. My father tried to hold on. He was embarrassed by his helplessness, often apologizing when I helped him with the simplest things. Sometimes he looked at me with such gratitude that it took my breath away. You're my most reliable, he said, squeezing my hand. Always have been. These words kept me going. It was more difficult with my mother. Her gratitude quickly gave way to demands. At first cautious, then increasingly direct. Nastia, you're still home, she said. You can stop by the drugstore. Nastia, make something lighter for Dad. Nastia, you didn't wash his clothes right again. I tried not to react. I understood she was at her limit. Her husband's illness, her work, her fear, all of it was weighing on her. I justified her harshness, chalking her words up to fatigue. But inside, a growing feeling began to grow that they weren't expecting me to help, but to submit completely. The strangest thing was Vika's presence. She had barely changed her lifestyle. In the morning, she would spend a long time getting ready, trying on outfits, taking photos in front of the mirror. During the day, she would go out on business, meeting friends, visiting salons, shopping. In the evening, she would return contented, without asking a single question about her father's condition. Sometimes I caught myself envying her easygoing nature. Not because I wanted the same, but because she could afford to feel less responsible. One day, I found her in the kitchen when I returned from work earlier than usual. Could you help with dinner? I asked, trying to speak calmly. Vika looked at me, as if I'd said something inappropriate. I can't cook, she shrugged. And, anyway, I've had a hard day today. I didn't argue. I had no energy. Over time, almost all of my salary went to the house. Medication, food, utilities. Mom just took the money without asking, without discussing it. I felt like a teenager again, without my own budget, my own space, my own voice. Some evenings, I'd lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, counting down the hours until morning. My body ached with fatigue, and the same thought kept running through my head. When did I stop being a daughter and become a resource? One day, after a particularly hard day, I allowed myself to go to bed early. But before I could close my eyes, I heard Mom's voice. Nastia, why haven't you changed Dad's bedding yet? I stood up, feeling my insides resist. While I was helping my father, he quietly said, Don't be mad at Mom. She's having a hard time. I nodded. Of course. It's hard for everyone. Except Vika. Later, as I passed the living room, I heard her laughter. She was video chatting with her friends, showing off her new purchases. Yes, it's expensive, but Dad's card will handle it, she said, laughing. I froze. Dad's card. The same one that received the money, part of which I sent every month. The card of a man who couldn't get out of bed on his own. At that moment, for the first time, real irritation flared inside me. Not fatigue, not resentment, but anger. I tried to talk to Mom. Maybe Vika could help too? I asked cautiously. Mom looked at me coldly. Don't start. She's having a hard time as it is. Hard in what way? I blurted out. Mom's gaze hardened. You've always been like this. Envious. That phrase stuck in my mind like a thorn. An envious one. Because I was asking for justice. I realized, in this house, the roles had long been assigned. Vika was the beloved. I was the convenient one. And the harder I tried, the less I was valued. I didn't yet know that a moment lay ahead that would finally reveal how easily they would erase me. But an uneasy premonition had already settled within me. Over time, I stopped counting the days. Everything turned into a gray mass of identical mornings, identical evenings, and endless fatigue. I lived by a schedule that didn't have a single line for me. Only responsibilities. I got up before everyone else to make my father breakfast, give him his medication, and check his blood pressure. Then came the long, grueling commute to work. In the evening, Home again, where not words of gratitude awaited me, but a list of new tasks. Vika, meanwhile, seemed to exist in another reality. She would sleep until noon, emerge from the room in a silk robe, turn on music, and calmly sip coffee while I knelt down scrubbing the floors or washing my father's sheets. Sometimes I felt like she genuinely didn't understand why I was angry. For her, everything that was happening was just background noise, unrelated to her. One day, I came home and saw a strange pair of men's shoes in the hallway. New, expensive. My heart sank unpleasantly. "Do we have guests?" I asked, walking into the kitchen. "It's Artyom," Vika responded cheerfully. "My boyfriend. He's staying with us for a while." A little while, in her words, never meant a specific time frame. Artyom turned out to be self-assured, loud, and surprisingly lazy. He quickly settled in. He'd take over the sofa, eat whatever he could without asking questions, leave the dirty dishes behind, and turn up the music at full volume. I never saw him help my father or even inquire about his well-being. Mom was delighted. "What a well-mannered young man," she said, putting food on his plate. "Vika, you're lucky." I watched this in silence. It was as if I didn't exist. If I tried to say anything, they interrupted me or pretended not to hear. One evening, when I returned from work completely exhausted, Mom met me at the door with an irritated expression. "Where have you been?" she asked. "Dad's been waiting for dinner for a long time." "I was late at work," I replied. "I told you so." "I told you so," she mimicked. "You always have some kind of excuse." I swallowed the words that were threatening to spill out and silently went to the kitchen. While I was feeding Dad, Vika and Artyom were laughing in the living room, discussing their weekend plans. "We're going out of town," Vika said. "We need to rest. I'm so tired." I almost laughed at the absurdity of those words. That evening, for the first time, I allowed myself to ask a direct question. "Vika, could you stay with Dad for a couple of hours tomorrow? I need to stay late." She looked at me with obvious irritation. "I'm not a nurse," she snapped. "And, anyway, I have my own plans." Mom immediately took her side. "Nastia, don't pressure your sister. She's going through a difficult time as it is." "So, it's not difficult for me then?" I blurted out. Silence fell over the room. Mom looked at me as if I'd done something unacceptable. "You're taking on too much," she said coldly. "No one forced you." That phrase hit harder than any scream. No one forced me. So everything I did was my choice. My fault. With each passing day, I felt more and more out of place. My room ceased to be my refuge. People kept coming in without knocking, taking my things, rearranging the furniture. One day, I discovered that some of my things had simply disappeared. "We put them away," Mom said calmly. "Vika needs more space." I looked at her, disbelieving. "This is my room," I said quietly. "You're only here temporarily," she replied. "Don't exaggerate." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark and, for the first time in a long time, allowed myself to think, what would happen if I left? The thought was both terrifying and strangely relieving. The next day, my father's condition worsened. The doctors spoke cautiously, without offering a prognosis. I hoped this would make Vika think that she would finally understand the seriousness of what was happening. But she only winced. "It's hard for me to see this," she said. "I'd better leave." She left. As always, that evening, when I returned home, another blow awaited me. I opened the door to my room and didn't recognize it. My things were folded into boxes. In their place were racks of clothes, shoes, and cosmetics. The room had become a walk-in closet. "What is this?" I whispered, feeling my hands tremble. Isn't it beautiful? Vika appeared behind me, beaming. I need space. You can sleep on the couch. At that moment, I realized, to them, I was no longer a person. I was a function, free labor, and something inside me began to break completely. After my room became Vika's walk-in closet, it was as if I ceased to exist completely. I slept on the couch in the living room, waking up at every rustle, at other people's conversations, at the slamming of doors. My body ached constantly, my back, my legs, my head. But the worst thing was the feeling that I'd been erased. Every morning began the same way. I woke up earlier than everyone else, so as not to disrupt the family's normal life. I cooked porridge for my father, gave him his medicine, checked to make sure he was breathing evenly. Then I got ready for work in silence, trying not to make any noise. Vika, meanwhile, slept peacefully, and Artyom snored as if this had been his home all along. I no longer tried to speak. Every attempt ended with accusations. I'm whining, I'm selfish, I'm ungrateful. So I kept quiet. I began to do everything automatically like a robot. But even that wasn't enough. One evening, my mother greeted me with a displeased look. "Why didn't you buy groceries?" she asked. "I transferred the money this morning," I replied. "As always." "That's not enough," she said coldly. "You work. You could give more. We have more expenses now." I realized it wasn't about Dad. It was about Vika and Artyom, about their food, entertainment, trips. "Mom," I said quietly, "I'm already giving away almost my entire salary." She waved her hand irritably. "Money isn't the most important thing. Family is the most important thing." Family, a word that had become an empty sound to me. A few days later, Dad got worse. He was taken back to the hospital. I spent the night there, sitting in a chair by the bed, holding his hand, listening to his heavy breathing. He barely spoke, only occasionally looking at me and weakly squeezing his fingers. "You're tired," he whispered. "I'm sorry." These words tore me apart inside. The only person who saw how hard it was for me apologized to me. When I returned home in the early morning, Vika was already getting ready to leave. "Artyom and I are going to see some friends," she said, fixing her makeup. "We'll be back late." "Dad's in the hospital," I said. "You know?" She shrugged. "Well, the doctors are there. What can I do?" I looked at her and didn't recognize her. She was my sister, the person with whom I'd shared my childhood. And now there was a gulf between us. That same day, Mom told me the news that was the last straw. "We've decided," she said, "that Artyom will live with us permanently. It's the right thing to do." "What about Dad?" I asked. "He needs peace." "Don't exaggerate," she snapped. "You always make things more complicated." I felt something hot and dangerous rising inside me. "What about me?" I asked. "Who am I anyway?" Mom looked at me wearily, as if I were a pesky problem. "You have to help. It's your duty." "Does Vika have a duty?" My voice trembled. "Don't compare," she said sharply. "You're the oldest. You're the one responsible." I went into the bathroom and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and cried for the first time in a long time, quietly, silently, so no one would hear. I felt like if I made a sound, I'd just fall apart. That evening, Vika threw a loud party at home. Music blared, laughter echoed throughout the apartment. I sat on the couch, clutching a pillow, and thought how absurd it seemed. Dad in the hospital, and here a celebration. I went up to Mom. "I can't do this anymore," I said. "It's hard. I need to either go back to my room or..." "Or what?" she interrupted. "Or I leave." Mom laughed. Where are you going? She asked mockingly. You have nothing. You gave everything to us. And that's when I realized she was right. I truly had nothing left, except myself. Late that night, after the guests had left, I went to the garage. There were boxes of my things there. I opened one, then another. Old photographs, books, clothes. My life, neatly folded and forgotten. I brought my suitcase. I started packing, without thinking, without planning. I just did. When Mom saw this, she turned pale. What are you doing? She asked. I'm leaving, I answered calmly. You can't, she said. Your father. I love Dad, I said. But I can't sacrifice myself anymore for those who don't see me. She screamed. She cried. She accused me. She said I was ungrateful, cruel, selfish. I listened and understood. Those words no longer had power over me. I closed the suitcase. And for the first time in a long time, I felt not fear, but determination. I left at night, without making a scene, without slamming doors. I simply dragged my suitcase out of the garage, ordered a taxi, and sat in the back seat, looking out the window. The house where I'd spent so much time was slowly disappearing around the corner. I didn't turn around. If I had, I might have changed my mind. The first few days, I lived in a fog. I rented a tiny studio apartment on the outskirts of town. Bare walls, a mattress on the floor, an old kettle. But it was quiet there. No one demanded, no one accused, no one reminded me of my debt. I could simply sit and breathe. I returned to work with renewed vigor. I took on additional projects, agreed to anything just to avoid being alone with my thoughts. The money was draining slowly, but steadily. I started saving again. I felt solid ground again. Mom didn't call for 3 days. And then it began. First, the messages, short, abrupt. Then the calls. Shouting. Accusations. She said I'd ruined the family, that my father was upset, that Vika was in shock. I didn't answer. I could no longer explain the obvious. A week later, I learned that my father had died. I was told curtly, without details, without an invitation to the funeral. My mother said I had no right to show up. I spent that day alone. I cried not only for my father, but also for the version of myself that believed that love always meant sacrifice. A few days later, I logged onto social media and regretted it. My mother had posted a photo of my father. The caption was short but brutal. We were abandoned at our most difficult moment. The eldest daughter chose herself. The comments were full of condemnation. People who didn't know the truth judged me without hesitation. And then, for the first time in all this time, I spoke up. I wrote my post. Calmly, without hysteria. I told everything. How I worked, how I paid, how I looked after her, how I was left without a room, without sleep, without a voice. I didn't accuse. I simply listed the facts. The reaction was immediate. People started asking questions. Many of those who had judged me began apologizing. Some wrote that they had experienced similar things. Some thanked me for my honesty. I didn't feel better right away, but I felt I was no longer alone. Months passed, then years. I changed jobs, got a promotion, finally saved up for a down payment, and bought a small apartment. Bright, quiet, with large windows. It was my space, without conditions or expectations. One day, almost 3 years later, I got a call again. It was Mom. Her voice was different, tired, broken. We need help, she said. We sold the house. Vika is in debt. Artyom left. We have nowhere to go. I was silent. We could stay with you, temporarily, she added. I closed my eyes. I remembered the couch, the boxes, the words, "You must." And I realized I felt not anger, but emptiness. "No," I said calmly. "I can't." She started to say something else, but I interrupted. I didn't cry after that call. I didn't feel guilty. Only a quiet, steady calm. Sometimes strength means not being patient. Sometimes love isn't a sacrifice. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to leave. I chose myself. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.